Hi everyone, I'm Matt Jacobson, the CEO and founder of Ducere Global Business School, and we're here at Entrepreneur with Ducere, episode number 9. Very excited for those of you who haven't joined Entrepreneur with Ducere before. This is one of the most exciting parts of what we do in our degree programs, because for us it's all about practical, real, relevant, applied learning. And there's no way to do that better than speaking to the people who have done incredible, amazing and inspirational things in the real world. So today we have an amazing guest, Tony Nash from Booktopia. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an intro, Tony, about yourself and your organisation, and then we're going to get into a few questions. So thanks for being with us today. Okay, so Tony is the co-founder and CEO of Booktopia, and it's an Australian online bookstore. It was founded in 2004. It's been listed in the AFR BRW's Fast 100 companies 8 times. It was voted Bookstore of the Year in the last 2 years. It's been a finalist in the Business Telstra Awards so many times you probably lost count. I think it's 7 or 8. But even more impressive, just announced, is that you won the New South Wales 2018 Business of the Year, and then a finalist for the National Business of the Year, which will be decided in just a few weeks. So good luck for that. We'll be cheering for you. And the business has had phenomenal and exceptional growth, the biggest online seller of books in the country. And in the last 10 years, I believe the revenue's gone from something like $4 million to over $110 million revenue, which is just unbelievable. So thank you very much for being with us. We're really excited to hear all about your journey and how you built an incredibly successful business. So let's get started.
Sure.
So just a couple of, I guess, background questions. What was life like before Booktopia? What were you doing, and was it always part of your plan to become an entrepreneur, or did it happen a little bit by accident?
So, well, to go all the way back, I got 56% in my HSC, scraped into university, failed in accounting and economics, and mastered in Space Invaders and snooker. So I dropped out after 6 months. I became the mail boy at the NRMA, which is like the RACV or RACQ, depends on where your listeners are. Like in the movies in the 80s where the kid, walks around delivering the mail, that was me. And then I did a computer programming certificate, which was a 6-month course, and got a job as a programmer. I was terrible, really bad. Probably at that point, the entrepreneurial desire started to kick in, and I wanted to get into sales. So I started selling computers. I was terrible at that too. Then I decided to travel around the world for 3.5 years, and it was that trip, which was like my university degree, where I manifested so many things out of nothing, lots of adventures. And while I was in London, I ended up getting a job as a recruitment consultant and for IT, and I was actually very good at that. So for some reason, that was my niche. So over the years, working as a recruiter, when I returned back to Australia, I'd done some workshops on entrepreneurship with a guy called Robert Kiyosaki, and I thought, I'm going to start my own, which I did in the mid-90s in my house, started my own recruitment agency for IT people on the internet. And it was in the days when I had to say to people, I'm an internet recruitment agency, and they would ask, what's the internet? So I had to explain the internet. So very early on, so 22 years I've been running my own companies. From the recruitment business, I convinced my brother and brother-in-law to join me, and my brother-in-law's background was an IBM software engineer, so we had built all this software for our recruitment business. That then led us to creating some chat software. We then dumped the recruitment company to focus on the chat software. Then there was a huge dot-com crash in the early 2000s that we got caught up in, and that's when I asked somebody, how do you get to the top of Google? Like, Google had been going for a few years, and maybe if we were at the top of Google for chat software, make a few more sales. And the guy told me what to do, and we got to the top of Google. Very quickly, I ended up winning some projects on doing the internet marketing rather than doing chat software, and we just became experts in doing internet marketing. And through that, we actually did a job for Angus and Robertson to get them to the top of Google, which introduced us to the book industry. and I just started Booktopia as a little side project. In the evenings on a $10 a day budget, back in 2004, as you said. So there was a lot of entrepreneurship there, a lot of lessons and learnings, things that didn't work and worked. But at the end of the day, Booktopia was the one that just continued to prosper.
That's really fascinating. So an incredible sort of story of transition and adaptability. One of the things that we certainly encourage and believe is that entrepreneurship is not about sitting in a room and designing a 50-page business plan and then just going ahead with that plan. That real world is much more about experimenting, adaptability, being nimble. And it sounds like that's definitely the journey that you took, and getting I guess a contract with Angus and Robertson was very fortuitous, but you also had the ability to see an opportunity and seize on that opportunity rather than trying to just pre-plan what the future might look like.
Absolutely, yep.
Interesting. Now you mentioned, which leads into my next question I was going to have for you, that you actually set this up with your brother and your brother-in-law. Now that can be fantastic. It can also be a big challenge working with family. So how have you made it work?
Look, there's a lot of aspects to that question. It's a really good one. There's the element of all for one and one for all, so that combined, connected outcome that you're all looking for, which may not always work with families. There may be the fact that because I've been the CEO and the boss, I tell them what to do, which is
easier for you.
Which is not exactly true.
Right.
I'll explain it like this, which could be quite helpful for the listener, is that there was a situation which occurred in our company in the last few years where an HR manager had come to me. She's no longer with us, but she said, your company is really just not working. There's a lot of dysfunction. There's the IT guys are arguing or don't like the marketing guys. The marketing guys, they're all at each other's throats. And I listened to her out and I thought, well, I better go and explore this. So I went across and I spoke to my IT guys, and we have in our marketing team, which is our book expert team, we've got really experienced book people working in there. And I said to the head of IT, who's also my deputy CEO, I said, boy, those marketing guys really must piss you off and frustrate you. And he goes, no, they're geniuses. So what do you mean? He goes, well, they actually do they do things that no one else can do. And I was quite staggered by, we talked for a while, but I was quite staggered by his position on that, right, because it was contrary to what the HR thought. And so then off I go to marketing and the book people, and those IT guys must really piss you off. They're geniuses. What they do is incredible. So when she was coming around to her exit interview, a number of months later when she decided to move on and go to another company, I brought this up with her again. I said, you think that if a company's going to get somewhere, you all have to row together. Like you're in the boat and there's an expression, we're rowing together, right? Absolutely. And your company is not rowing together. And I said to her, well, I completely do not subscribe to that thinking. What do you mean? Now, I'm not a sailor, but I do know that if you're going to sail, in particular on a sailing boat, the fastest you can go is when you put the spinnaker up. And a spinnaker, the shape of it, 1, 2, 3, so everything's pulling in different directions. And that when you do that and the wind's behind you, the sail fills and you fly through much faster than if you're in a boat trying to row. And I explained to her that that's my philosophy. And I know that because my relationship with my brother, where I'm more of the entrepreneur, I want to make things happen, reinvest and keep growing. He's the one who's really tough on the dollars. We've got to make a profit. We can't waste. We've got to avoid risk. So although I feel like I'm being driving, and of course we have been driving the business forward, I'm also have my brother in the back of my mind going, is this going to get through the directors? Are we going to be able to sign off as a board on that tactic, that initiative? So when you ask that question about working with family, and it is actually an important part of our the way that we operate. And sometimes when it seems like teams or family members or whoever it might be is not kind of working with you, it may just simply be that it's in the best interest. So you just sometimes need to see through where people are at, and if their heart's in it and they're committed to the outcome and the goal, then you do need to listen to what they have to say.
Very interesting. Well, if everyone's just, I guess, a yes man and saying the same thing, you don't really need them. What you want is the challenge and the difference of opinion to keep putting you, I guess, at the front of your game.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the type of CEO that you are. So for me, I do that. I'm sure Donald Trump, in his corporation, based on the way he runs his presidency, probably doesn't. It's probably fairly dictatorial.
That's right. Interesting. Okay. So that's very interesting in terms of family structure and the dynamic that can work. In terms of just corporate structure, and then we'll get into the business operational side, is it true that you don't have any outside investors? You've just done it all with your own growth and your own capital? And what's the reason for that? When you think about entrepreneurs today and startups, almost step one before people have even got a concept ready, they're already like trying to raise dollars. Maybe that's not always the best way to go.
It's interesting because Booktopia, it's funny, when I started Booktopia, they said, what do you want to start a bookstore for? You know, there's Angus and Robertson, there's Borders, there's Dymocks, you know, there's Amazon. You're too late. Now people say to me 14 years later, it's lucky you got in early. So we started it very organically. It was not our major business. Our major business was the internet marketing. It just kept getting bigger. And so by focusing on it being sustainable, then we were able to get 30% growth every year.
Phenomenal.
Which was enough.
Yeah.
So certainly in the years we went from like 4 million, as you said, in 2008, and if I can rattle them off, 7 million, 9 million, 14 million, 20 million, 27, 39, 50, 80, 100,
Incredible.
115. So all organic. We did in 2016 try and do an IPO on the ASX. But after spending a year doing all the work, we had to restructure our company, which cost a lot. The word came through that Amazon was coming to Australia. And so all the investor community said, well, that's it, they're done. And so everyone bowed out. So we did try and do some sort of capital raise, but it didn't work out for us. So we had to pay for that, which was quite a few $1 million. Look, organic growth, if you can continue to do it and do it rapidly, which is what we did, without having an agenda from an investor who's looking to, put a certain amount of money in, it could be $1 million, $10 million. They're trying to work out how can I convert my $1 million into 3 million or 10 million into 30 million. And so you may not do things that you may be forced to do things that they want you to do and you don't really want to do. So we were lucky that we were able to do that. Look, the book industry is a very complex industry. It's you got 30 million active books right now. There's no other industry that has that many products.
Huge.
Massive databases to understand how to drive traffic, which is what we were doing before. Build websites that can respond with that much data and that much content. Instantaneously, to know what to do and to have that as a priority. That's what we focused on. So I would recommend organic growth. We did have a competitor for a while in Australia. So what happened was Penguin, the publisher, bought Angus and Robertson, and they put millions of dollars into it. And in the end, they decided to offload it because they tried to catch up with us and they'd spent about $20 million and they were losing a lot of money every year. So we bought it off them. Now we can actually say that we're a 130-year-old company.
That's amazing. You've bought the history as well. I think that's really incredible because I'm a big believer in business fundamentals. And a lot of organisations today aren't capital intensive, so you don't need millions of dollars in manufacturing equipment or whatever it may be, particularly for online businesses. But I think there is too much of an emphasis on building a 5-year Excel spreadsheet with budgets and forecasts and go out to investors. rather than the fundamentals of if you've got a product and you can market and sell that product and make a margin in between. It's the essence of a good business, so congratulations. So the business model was obviously fantastic and you nailed that really well, but growth is one of the risk areas actually for companies. A lot of organisations talk about the risks associated with growing too fast. So how in the past decade were you able to grow as incredibly as you have, but be able to manage that growth?
I think that one of the things that I observed in our growth is that, so what I would do every month, being the sales guy in the team, is I would look at what did we do last year for the same month, and how can we be 30% more? And I would do that every single month. And so to challenge ourselves by that, you would have to come up with initiatives to do it in terms of, well, I think we can grow by 18% maybe. But what can we do to actually get that extra 10%? So that was one part of it. The other part was, what I noticed was the people who had been with us just got used to it getting bigger. And it wasn't lumpy. So it wasn't like huge growth and then we're struggling to get that out the door or complete projects. It was just, everyone was in this cadence of we're growing. Yes, we've moved another location, or we've got more stock, or we've got more people, or invested in automation, or there's been a little bit of our investment in automation, because we've spent about $10 million in automation thus far. The book Who Moved My Cheese, it's like things change, so you're transitioning, we've got to learn new systems. So my experience is that by doing it gradually and always doing it, I feel like we've been able to manage it well. That's my personal experience of it, rather than just let's throw a lot of money in it. We're going to have to expand quickly. And everyone's going, and there's always losses because you just can't be efficient in that environment when you do a big capital raise and you've got to get things up and systems. It doesn't. Amazon's proof of that arriving into Australia over the last year or so. It is difficult even for those big guys.
So you mentioned Amazon, and you talked about also even potentially a listing a couple of years back, but there was a bit of, I guess, uncertainty in what would become the marketplace with the juggernaut coming in. How do you compete against the Goliath of the biggest, I guess, e-tailing company in the world? How do you stay competitive, or how do you differentiate?
There's so many aspects to that question and answering. So I'll work through them. First of all, let's think about the word compete. I may not look at today, but in my younger years, in my 20s, I was an athlete. And as an athlete, our coach would tell us I was a decathlete, so you did all the events, but for the 100 meters, where I used to run about 11 flat, which is okay for a decathlete, he would say, if you're running and you look to the side, you will slow down. So you're basically looking at your competition. But if you can build peripheral vision, so you kind of know where everyone's at while you're running, that's that principle of being aware where your competitors are is kind of like how I operate. I don't really focus on our competitors. So that's one part, the competition side. Amazon is everything to everyone. And when you're everything to everyone, you cannot be one thing to one group. So what happened was, we've done very well in books. In fact, if I roll back to several years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, there were other online retailers around in books, but they kind of got their books up to 4 or 5 million like we had done, and then they thought, well, I'm going to branch out and I'm going to do baby wear or clothing or something. And so you've got to put the same amount of energy into the one as you're doing to the other. And I found that if we just keep focusing on books and do that really, really well, we got all that extra revenue and more by doing that. So it is easier to do that and do that really well. And so that's one part. With Amazon, there's only so much real estate on your screen, and in particular on a phone, which when we all started out, people just used computer screens, then tablets. Now we get over 50% of our traffic throughout the phone. Right. So if you've got everything and you're trying, is that really going to be the best customer experience? And it may not be. it is obviously does very well because Amazon is a huge company and they do extremely well. But Amazon's focus today, interestingly, books is where they started. But their book revenue is something like $6 billion US dollars. Now to us, turning over 120 million, that's massive, massive, and they are massive. But out of their 170 billion in revenue in 2018, it's just over 3% of their sales. They're more interested in web services, Amazon Web Services, where they make a lot of profit. Their marketplace, there's their electronics, fashion, there's a whole bunch of other categories. Their Kindle, their Audible, audio books. So physical books is not necessarily their priority. In fact, today, what we see is that in the Amazon website and the checkout, where they've gone from listing all the potential sellers, there's a buy box, where they're basically saying, you want to buy this? Click here. A lot of the time, it is not Amazon. A lot of the time, it's someone else. They actually make more money promoting somebody else to sell it to somebody else, and they make their commission on the way through. So we're not particularly worried. I mean, they're big and they will make a huge impact, but they're not part of our. We actually don't get nervous or worried about that kind of stuff. We focus on what we're doing. In fact, something that we've done recently to even permeate deeper into the book industry, we've actually become a book distributor as well. So not only being a retailer and using our 13,000 square metres that we have near the Olympic Stadium in Sydney to distribute, but now publishers are saying, we want you to be the distributor in Australia for our product. And that means that we're able to obviously get deeper discounting, but we're also servicing the bookstores, and we make sure that the product is in Australia. We're not having to, quite often, not all of it is available in Australia. It's actually located offshore. So we're making sure that all the stuff that Aussies want, we've got it here ready to go. We have 150,000 titles at the moment in stock in our distribution centre, and our goal is to get to 200,000 or more.
Right. Well, that's an age-old debate, depth or breadth. And it sounds like you're a big believer in be very focused, very niche, and be competitive by understanding your product really, really well. Because in any business, there's always going to be different opportunities that come up, and we could also do this, or we could add that service on. But there's something to be said for great expertise and depth, which is what you've done. And that's really interesting that even with Amazon, that people think is such a huge bookseller, which they are, but their eye is not on the ball in the same way it is for you, because it's a few percent of their business, whereas for you it's 100% of your business, and that's what you're living and breathing all day, every day.
It's actually interesting. Certainly when we won the New South Wales Business of the Year the other day, and people were coming up who buy from us, who were there, who have their own companies who were listed there. And so what I'm noticing today is, in the old days, Amazon's cheaper. What I'm noticing, and it's interesting for all of us to understand, being the cheapest is not necessarily going to win you the sale. It's actually, if you've got it, is it in stock? Is it will they deliver fast? In our case, we do have a lot of that. We have 150,000 titles in stock out of the 27 million that are available, but 83% get sold out of the ones that we stock, because we're analysing all the time. The other things that we do is we do a lot of philanthropic work, sponsoring literacy festivals, Indigenous literacy, writers festivals, readers conferences. So if customers know that we've got a good, they know about our philanthropic work.
Social conscious as well, not just
so
the bottom line.
That helps in terms of them going, hey, I'll buy from them. They may not be the cheapest, but they're just all around very, very good. And this comes back to the idea of, when you're an online business, it's very hard sometimes to actually connect with the customer and make them feel that you're a knowledge expert. We know that if you walk into a bookstore, and a good bookstore in any city in Australia, connecting with the customer will always get a richer experience than online. Our job is to emulate that as close as we can without actually being there, and that's part of what we do too. And when you're everything to everyone like Amazon is, it's really hard to do that.
So looking at this from the other side of the coin, the comments you're just making about the store experience and customer service and how close you can emulate that. The other side is automation. And you mentioned you've spent millions of dollars, large investments in automation. So how important is technology as a component of the success of Booktopia?
What is interesting from my journey, because I had not come from logistics, I understood the software component, and not to say that I coded any of that or was involved in it, but I obviously had oversight on what projects we worked on. But what you've got to understand in our business is that if we do not invest in automation and technology, we cannot commit to the scale. So if you become more and more successful, and the numbers, so we're shipping around 25,000 units per day. We peaked last Christmas at around 32,000 units per day. This Christmas will go at around 38,000 units per day.
Wow.
If you cannot do that, what you do, and I know some online retailers that have to do this, they're just throwing more people at it, which becomes more expensive. You get diseconomies of scale. So you actually so what we do is we spend a lot of time actually mapping out where we believe we're going to be in terms of our sales volumes,
right,
units being shipped per day, and invest and just enough to make sure that we're keeping pace. So when we first moved into our facility in Sydney, we invested $5 million. And that enabled us to get from 7,000 units per day to around 20,000 units per day. Then we invested another 5 million, and now we're about to embark on another 10 million over the next couple of years.
Phenomenal. So that's really interesting around automation, but in terms of, which is, I guess, a measure of trying to plan, as you're saying, look at the sales growth and have systems in place to cater for that. And you can plan to as great an extent as possible, but at the end of the day, there's risks and mistakes will be made. So can you talk a little bit about the concept of taking risks for our entrepreneurs, being open to making mistakes, and have you learnt from some of the mistakes you've made along the way?
Boy, there's so many things in there that I can just go off on deviation. So there's a few things. One is that when we talk about mistakes, for me, I have a personal mental framework around that, and that is, through experience, through business experience, people get better judgments. In the world, that's what we do. So you meet people, you're in a certain situation, looks a bit dodgy, better do a runner, I don't like what's going on here, I've got a bad feeling in my stomach about this. Mm-hmm. That's intuition. And to me, intuition, if you break the word in two, intuition. So what's tuition? Tuition is training. Tuition is like the money that you pay to do a course. Mm-hmm. So intuition, all right, so if you're in training, that means you take an experience and then you put it in your gut and you learn, and then you can learn for the future. Mm-hmm. That is very much around, so the business with the IPO, where it didn't happen. We spent $4 million, it didn't come to anything, what did I learn? And just move on. It took me about 3 hours to recover, and then it really felt like one door closed, another 10 opened.
Right.
It's that kind of mindset, and the mindset of an entrepreneur means that, look, it's a little bit like this. So if this was time from now into the future, and these were the things that happened in your daily work life, something great happened, woohoo, let's party. State, you win the state for the Telstra Business Awards. Then you find out that, I don't know, someone important resigns, or you didn't get that contract, and you go down here. And then something great happened, and then something bad. And you go through this roller coaster of emotions. Mm. So if you map that out over time and just measure the distance that you traveled, like this is a long distance. What I don't do is I didn't celebrate the highs. The winning the award was great and wonderful, fantastic for the team and for everyone involved. But at the same time, when something doesn't work out, I don't go low. So I really clip the emotional bandwidth, mm-hmm. which means that I don't have to travel as far as others. And I think that's an important part of being an entrepreneur, that when stuff doesn't work out the way that you expected, you got to be able to get over it and go, okay, what did I learn? And because if you're an entrepreneur, things will not work out the way that you want. Like that is like if you don't get that, then you
shouldn't be an entrepreneur.
You're missing life.
Yeah.
Like that is the nature of it. And so I know entrepreneurs who kick and scream and yell, and maybe that's their way of dealing it. It's not the way that I deal with it, because you've got to be expecting something to come out of left field.
And if you know that in advance, then preparing for resilience and building resilience is a really important trait and aspect as well, because there's always that sort of, I guess, glory side of entrepreneurship, and people see the Facebooks and the Googles and these big success stories, but there's always challenges along the way. So really interesting points about being able to ride and even off those highs and lows. So we've just got a couple more short questions, and then we're going to actually open it up to questions. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to take some questions from you guys. So feel free to send through any questions that you may have. So a question that I have, I guess, is the future of Booktopia. And this is even maybe a little bit of a personal question. So I grew up and I've always enjoyed reading books. I've got 2 teenage kids. Seems to be a great struggle getting them to read anything. Even with schooling, they seem to be more interested in watching YouTube videos or listening to things that are audible. What do you feel about the next generation and the future of Booktopia in the longer term?
Look, the interesting for us, I mean, we've been hearing over the last decade the doom and gloom of the book industry, the death of bookshops, Amazon coming, annihilating everyone. The actual book trade in Australia has not deviated from $2 billion over the last decade.
Right.
A little bit of oscillation. People buy books. They're buying them for so many different reasons as well, to educate themselves, to give to their kids, coffee table books, to escape, and so I have a great view on that books are going to be in people's lives for a very, very long time. In fact, I mean, I get to have a lot more conversations than you would. You're obviously an outside observer, but just the anecdotal things around, it's just so great to have time away from the screen. That's just so important. It's just so I enjoy my book time. So I hear that a lot. The other thing that I've heard, a couple of things which are interesting. One, which is that they did some testing between one group that were reading the ebook digital version of a book, and those that read the physical version of a book, and it was a crime novel, and they found that the comprehension and retention of actually what happened while in the sequence as the crime or as the things unfolded, the people that actually read the physical book, because they had physical memory of where they were up to, this happened before that and then that happened, whereas the people that read the digital version kind of lost a little when things did it happen before that or after that, because they're just really consuming it in the screen. Now, more importantly to that though, I have heard that there are teachers in schools who did migrate across to a digital classroom. They're moving back because they're finding that the education outcomes that they're trying to hit are being missed, and they realise that the kids just aren't getting it with the digital. So I'm very confident that books will be around for a long time. They've done very well for over 500 years, and I think they should be around.
Bullish that they're going to be continuing for a long time. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to take some questions. So I'll just grab that over here. Thank you very much. Okay. So question here, what skills and attributes do you look for when hiring new staff? So we talked a lot about the business, but then obviously you've got to make things happen internally within an organisation. So a great question. So when hiring staff, what are some of the key attributes, some of the key things that you're looking for to bring people inside the company?
Having been a recruitment consultant for 14 years, I have a lot of personal experience around that. And what's interesting for me is that, and I'll take our very first employee, so it's 13 years ago, she had been a nanny for 11 years, and no one would give her a job. And we needed someone to be able to answer the phones and deal with the issues. Why wasn't this order coming? And I figured somebody that could deal with kids and nappies and, you know, the
multitasking,
crazy, right? Why not? She's been with us for 13 years. So the guy who's our director of books, he was in customer service. He ran his own secondhand bookstore for many years, and then he gave that away and he joined us. He loves books. He's actually written a book now, which is being published by HarperCollins shortly. So it's about kind of where you're coming to understand your passion and you know where you want to head with your career. Nothing is worse than hiring someone because they've been doing exactly the same thing in the other company and you want them to do exactly the same thing here. I never understood that in IT recruitment. Why would you hire people? That was the recipe they gave me. We want one of these. Well, why would they join you? Oh, because we'll pay them more money. Career path is really important to me. So what's their trajectory? Where are they heading? That's what I like. And I think if anybody has that approach, that's their personal approach, I want to add value. I want to actually work for a company and give more than I get. Generally what I find, those people leave us, they go into bigger and better jobs outside. It doesn't bother me if someone resigns. When someone resigns, where are you going? What are you doing next? Must be better than what, you know, like to do whatever you're doing next must be better than what you're doing here. Congratulations. So what we look for, and I must admit today, I don't do a lot of the recruitment, only of the senior positions, is that you want to have those and people who are a cultural fit. And you don't want to join I think as a potential, you know, person looking for a job, what's the culture like? Am I going to be happy there? Am I just mercenary and I want to do the money or I want the experience? It's never going to work out.
I agree. Yep, very interesting. Passion and attitude, I think, are great ways to be hiring. Getting back specifically to entrepreneurs, the next question, thanks very much for sending these through. Do you think there are any common traits that entrepreneurs share?
Well, my definition of an entrepreneur is we make the invisible visible. So basically, it already exists in the universe, and that what we do is we hack into the universal database and we pull it out, and then we get a commission or royalty because we did the hack. That's my thinking. So if for those people who are entrepreneurs, they see what the others can't see, and then they materialize it. However, many people do that. A lot of the times the missing component is actually the turning that idea into cash. So how are you going to make money out of that? Because I hear a lot of people coming up with ideas and I go, so where's the money in that? Why will people hand over money for that? That's the most important part in terms of the way that I think about things. And when I observe others who have commercialized their ideas, it's that they've actually found a value proposition that people want to pay for. Otherwise it just doesn't work.
Yep, still gets back to the business fundamentals. So the next question I've got, and you used the word hack, which is interesting because the next question I've got is on cybersecurity. And the question is, cybersecurity is on everyone's mind nowadays. How do you reassure customers about their data collection and safety?
We've got a data protection policy. Our IT guys are right across it. They make it a high priority for them. It's one of those things with the internet where if you become big enough, you're probably going to be a target. So you have to be fairly preemptive. What we do is there's a company that we use to actually try and hack into our system, and so we pay for those guys to hack in, and then they then tell us if they've found any holes, and then we block them.
Right. Excellent. Okay. And the last question I have here, we kind of touched on a little bit in terms of clearly the passion for holding the real book and the paper, and even some studies that show that reading a crime novel, for example, in paper can have better retention than doing it through, say, an ebook. But the question here is Audible books are becoming more popular and more successful. How do you deal with this type of competition? I guess the first question is it really competition, or are you also in the market of Audible books? So that's actually a product rather than a competition. Or is it a competition? How is that world evolving in terms of Audible books for you?
So I need to declare that I read Audible books every day, but not audible.com, the Amazon. I actually get the CD version, which we sell. We have, if you go to Booktopia website, you'll see audio. Why? Because I like to be able to hand it on to someone else. And so you can share it around, and I think this is a great book, and it can be listened to many, many times.
The same way you can hand to a friend a paper book.
That's right. So the way that I consume my books is backwards and forwards to work, which is probably around 40 to 45 minutes a day, and I've gone through a lot of books through that. However, there are so many other books that just simply cannot be converted into an audio book, which are being sold all the time. And I think most people, when they think about books, they think about there's the first word, chapter 1, right, prologue, all the way to the end. But a lot of books, coffee table books, kids books, technical books with a lot of diagrams, that won't necessarily convert. And so for the ones where it's kind of got a beginning and an end, I think they're great. Other people consume and process books much faster than a book is spoken, so it's not enough for them. They like romance readers are voracious; they will just read through that in 2 hours, and therefore it's a personal choice. But I personally love them.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we've been getting some amazing insights and lessons in this session of Entrepreneur with Ducere.
We have one more question we've got to get to.
From a great entrepreneur. I'll come back to this one then in a second. I was just going to ask you the last question that I had on here is we're getting amazing wisdom from you, but where does your wisdom come from? Do you have any particular entrepreneurial role models that have inspired you?
I've never had that question. Okay, so look, as I said, I did a workshop with Robert Kiyosaki back in 1993 called the Business School for Entrepreneurs. It was 16 days. Started at 7 in the morning and finished at 2 a.m.
Wow, that's intense.
You had your running team, then you had workshops during the day, and then you had your marketing project at night, which you worked till late. It was crazy, and that was really influential in terms of me wanting to go out and do that. And there was a lot of things that I learned then that made sense to me in terms of the only reason you start a business is to sell it. The fact that you want to hold on to it because it gives you an annual dividend, that's your choice, but you build it so it's saleable. So all of your financials need to be robust. So we've had a CFO for many years. We've had PwC as our auditors for several years. So everything is done to make sure that you're creating value, and that's come through. So a lot of the things that we've done in our business has come from those lessons. I guess talking to people, I like networking. I like meeting people, but basically, I think what's worked for us is really focusing on what our customers want and making that an absolute priority, and listening and watching and observing, and that's defined a lot of the outcomes that we've achieved by what do they really want. And in the book industry, I can assure you that they didn't think that way at all. It was always, we're going to publish a book, here it is, and you read it, you'll pay it at this price, you get it in this format, and we're going to reject all the other ones, and the whole book industry is turned on its head. It's very, very different, which I think we saw what the book industry did not see because we didn't come from books.
Right. Okay, thank you. Very interesting. I really wanted to thank you, Tony. That has just been an absolutely inspiring session of Entrepreneur with Ducere, and fascinating insights, and really honest and candid experiences and lessons that you've given us. So we really appreciate that. And to everyone else, next month, tune in for the next episode of Entrepreneur with Ducere. And if anyone wants any further information on the Ducere side of things, for our bachelor degrees, master's programs, etc., go to ducere.edu.au. And if you want anything books, paper-based or CD-based and Audible, go to Booktopia and get your fill there. Thank you very much, Tony.
Pleasure. And if anyone wants to reach out and ask, they can go to LinkedIn and just Tony Nash Booktopia and they can ask me any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you.